Thanks for tuning in to the Salute Report. I'm Tim Chapman. Today's episode is a special one for Drew and I as we get to sit down with Dave Carey, a former naval aviator, highly decorated, who was shot down over the skies of Vietnam and spent 5.5 years as a POW. I hope you enjoyed the discussion, and thanks again for tuning in. All right, Dave Carey, welcome to the podcast here, and I have my partner as usual in crime, Drew McDonald, with us, and before we get started, I want to thank Drew for introducing me to you. I've enjoyed the conversations we've had so far, and enjoyed the book. By the way, Dave's book. I'm not sure if this is the only one. You can educate me here, but the one that we'll refer to today, which is only about 3 weeks old to me, but I feel very impactful in the time that I spent reading it and thinking about the situations that you detail in the book. The Ways We Choose: Lessons for Life from a POW's Experience by Dave Carey. Dave Carey, very nice to have you, and honored to say the least. And thank you for being here.
Well, Tim, I'm delighted to be with you and Tango Alpha 3 today. That is the only book. I keep thinking I have more books in me, but I don't have the discipline to sit down and stare at the word processor for hours and hours and hours and hours.
Yeah. Writing a book is probably one of the easiest things that you've ever had to do, but I understand. And I would be incredibly surprised if there weren't probably a volume, a few books within the brain space that occupies your physical body. But man, I can tell you, this is that's one heck of an experience in a book, and thank you for writing it. It's very impactful, as I have said before. And in fact, I called you, if you remember, halfway through the book, and man, I was literally emotional because the journey that you took was so tremendous. It reminds me, by the way, and I don't want to get off too much of a tangent, but my mother and father-in-law are from Russia, and my both actually grew up at some points in their childhood in orphanages because their parents were on the wrong side of the revolution, and in fact, my father-in-law's mother ended up in a gulag for a bit of time, and one of the books that he required me to read before taking his daughter's hand was the Gulag Archipelago.
Oh wow!
And it's just an amazing read, and a reminder that if we're not diligent and watch what we're doing in terms of the direction we're going in as a country, that things could turn out bad.
Yeah.
Yep. Ja, nie gawaruti pariski.
My Russian hasn't kept up, so.
Okay. Tovarish, too bad.
Too bad. Anyway, so let's get started. Let's talk about among your Russian lingual skills. Let's talk about Dave Carey. Take us way back, right before the military. What was it like growing up, and how did you get motivated, or why did you think you might have wanted to go into the military?
Well, this isn't going to sound very patriotic to you. I can remember, I grew up in a little town in Pennsylvania, just east of Pittsburgh. And I can remember just about the time my junior year was starting that I decided I wanted to go to college. And, there's a lot to be said for making a decision. For one thing, my grades got way better. And somebody had to pay for it. So I was a jock, and I was talking to anybody and everybody that would talk to me about schools. And through town came one of the coaches from the Naval Academy. and he wanted to talk to me. My grades were pretty good by the end of my junior year, by the way. And he wanted to talk to me, and so of course, I was talking to him. Uh, and the way it worked back then, I suppose it's the same now, but I haven't kept track of it, was that the athletic department would line up candidates. You had to take all the tests, do all the stuff, and be fully qualified. And if a congressman or a senator or anybody couldn't fill one of their vacancies for whatever reason, the athletic association would say, okay, here, appoint this guy. And so even though I was from Western Pennsylvania, I was appointed to the Naval Academy ultimately by the Honorable Adam Clayton Powell from Harlem. And
really?
oh yeah. And so that's how I got to the Naval Academy. Now, I went there to play football. As a matter of fact, the coach that was recruiting was Bill Belichick's father. Oh, wow. Steve Belichick. He was an assistant coach at the Naval Academy at that time. I remember Bill Belichick being about a 10 or 12-year-old little kid running around the grounds at the Naval Academy.
Wow.
So when I went to the Naval Academy, I did not, here's how ignorant I was. I did not know that a naval officer wore a different uniform than a sailor. All I knew was what I saw in the movies, which were generally Cracker Jacks and Dixie Cups. And I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything. None of my family had been in the military. They all worked for the railroads. And so during World War II, they were exempt. In Korea, they were exempt. And so none of my family had been in the military. I knew nothing. But what I knew was they offered me a full ride.
There you go. That's
so I can remember I got a letter from them then in about May that said you have an appointment from the Honorable Adam Clayton Powell, yada yada yada. Let us know what you're going to do, and show up the 5th of July. And so I can remember going to my mom and saying, "Mom, I'm going to go to the Naval Academy. We need to be there the 5th of July. Can we get down there then?" And off we went.
Oh, wow.
It was the first time I had ever seen the Naval Academy. First time, I knew nothing. Wow. It was talk about a shock. Holy cow!
Oh, I want to.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say I want to get into that shock, but I have one intriguing. So, did you play football for Navy? Did you get to play?
That's another story. I'm at the point in my life where there are no sound bites. Everything's kind of a story. So you sort of have to herd me along here as we go. I'd played football in high school. I wrestled in high school. So I got to the Naval Academy, and that summer, plebe summer, the summer before your freshman year, you had to do something. And so I went over to the wrestling loft. And then it was time to play football. I went down and got my jock, and I don't know if you can say that on podcasts, and I got my pads and went out with the freshman football team. Well, my high school played a single wing line, unbalanced line, and I was the inside pulling tackle. I only weighed about 155 pounds. Oh, wow. But I was reasonably quick. And so I could be the pulling tackle. So I go out to practice. We do calisthenics. They start blowing the whistle, and they say, quarterbacks go over there, halfbacks go over there, tackles go over there. So I go over with the tackles. That's all I knew. I mean, they didn't let me touch a football when I was in high school. I didn't know what a football looked like. I was a pulling tackle and a linebacker. And so I go over there with the tackles, and it's like I'm standing in a forest. I mean, even back then, these guys were big.
I bet.
Not nearly as big as they are now, by the way, but they were big. And they started beating my brains out. And this went on for 2 or 3 days. It never dawned on me, go somewhere else when they blow the whistle. I mean, I've never done that. And so finally I decided this is not going to work. And I went into the coach's office. Let me tell you, I'd never quit anything in my life. And I went into the coach's office. Now, I should have gotten a hint, by the way. He's sitting there with his feet up on the desk and a newspaper up. And when he puts the newspaper down and he said, "What's your name?" I should have gotten the hint. but I didn't get to hear it. You know, I was God's answer to Navy football. And here I was going to bail on them. And I said, Coach, this isn't working. I'm not nearly big enough to play with these guys. If it's all the same to you, I'm going to go back up to wrestling loft. And he said, that's fine. As long as you give it your very best somewhere, we'll be plenty happy with you. I know you're not a very big guy. And so I went back up to wrestling loft. And essentially then I wrestled my way through the Naval Academy.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask you if the offense could run anything other than a triple option, but I mean, that's pretty much what they do today still. So
Still, yeah. They've done it forever.
exactly. That's an awesome story.
Right. So you're
Okay.
in the Navy. You're at the Naval Academy. You are a wrestler. You're attending to your studies, and now it's time for you to graduate and go out into the real Navy training, which is your job, what you're going to be doing. And how did you choose aviation, or did it choose you? And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it almost chose me. During the summer at the Naval Academy, you go out with the fleet. So the summer after my freshman year, I spent on a destroyer out of Charleston, South Carolina. The summer after our sophomore year is aviation summer. We go to basic training and to intermediate training, what was back then intermediate training, and get some flight time, fly with instructors, do a little flying. We even had a carrier landing in that whole evolution that summer. And then the summer before our senior year, I was on submarine for almost 8 weeks. I was on the oldest diesel submarine in the United States Navy at that time. And I loved the flying, and I really loved the submarine too. However, the nuclear power program was gearing up at that time, was big time, and Admiral Rickover, you may have heard his name, was in charge of it, and you had to be interviewed to get into the nuclear power program. Well, my grades weren't that good at the Naval Academy. I mean, I was in the top half of my class, but you had to be pretty way up there to get into the nuclear power program. So I decided I'd go fly. I thought I liked that. I enjoyed it. It was great fun. So that's kind of how it happened. You know, it was no great plan on my part that all my life I want to be a tailhook aviator. I just thought, well, I'll go try that. That looks like fun.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. So everything happens for a reason, right? I mean, you kind of haphazardly join the military, and you kind of haphazardly end up being a Top Gun, so to speak, and flying. Well, at some point you flew A-Force,
Yes.
as I see behind you. But so you know, you go through training, and you know, obviously escape and evasion is part of your training, and it's a part that you're probably, if it's like anything else, you're told to take seriously, because this can really happen. But given the circumstances with Vietnam and how things were escalating, this was a real thing. So so it might be a weird question, but did you go into the escape and evasion training with a sense of reality, or did you just go through it just so you get out to your next duty station and go on with whatever it was you were doing?
Yeah, there was no sense of reality. It was just something we had to do. You know, you got to go for a week of this. There were actually 2 times, a week at a crack, and okay, we'll go through that part of the training. I mean, you know, these things don't happen to you or to me.
Right.
They happen to the other guy. So
It happens to the ones that write books, right?
yeah, yeah, that's right.
Right.
So we went through it, you know, and a question that might occur to you is, did that training help me in retrospect? And in fact, it did, except that the military training it has a little problem with this training, which generally is that it's a war behind.
Right.
So I ended up in Vietnam, and all of my training came out of Korea. What happened to the guys who were shot down in Korea? Well, some of that was exactly right, spot on for Vietnam, and some of it was just no way, didn't even relate.
Right.
So so that's it,
Right.
some of it helped, and some of it was,
Right.
it didn't. As a matter of fact, a little bit of it was a bit counter. Um, for example, what I remember from my training on those series schools was generally they told us that if you were tough enough, long enough, the folks would get tired of screwing with you and eventually throw you in the compound with the guys. Well, let me tell you, my experience was nobody was tough enough. Nobody was tough enough long enough. They never got tired of messing with us, and they never threw us into the compound with the guys. So it was just kind of until we realized this isn't going to be like what they trained us for.
Right.
It was discouraging, to think, doggone, I'm not tough enough. I haven't been tough enough long enough.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
now, and some of the training was, I said, was just right on. For example, when I was being tortured and brought into the system over there, once I was captured, at one point they did a good guy, bad guy thing to me. And it was just almost right out of survival school, except that it was not a play in my mind. I thought it was real. I was scared to death. This guy's swinging this machete and trying to hit me, and I'm rolling around on the floor, and the good guy's trying to wrestle the bad guy out of the room. It was extremely well done. It wasn't until afterwards,
Right.
the next day I thought, oh, that was the good guy, bad guy thing they talked about in survival school.
Lord.
So, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
my thought in asking that question about training was I was particularly interested in the portion of the book whenever it happened, right? Whenever you were shot out, you deployed you were on the ground, people were coming in on you, and you reached for your radio. And all of a sudden you couldn't operate you had to really concentrate to do something that is relatively simple, right? I mean, they're built relatively simple, so it would have
Very
to work.
simple.
But at that point, do you go, "Oh my God, I should have been paying attention"?
Yeah. Well, you do, as a matter of fact, and that's kind of the way life is too, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah. All of a sudden you think, oh, I wish I had paid closer attention.
Yep.
That's right. So you're on the ground. You've got the enemy's coming in on you. You're kind of reconciling with yourself that this is how it's going to be. And you're about to enter another unknown, right? A horrific unknown, because it's not like leaving home to go to school. It's not like once you graduate school, you're actually part of the armed services. This is like, am I going to live through tomorrow?
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, it was. But let me frame it up this way. I think I was in shock. This was all happening, like when the missile hit my airplane, when the thing was spinning, when I ejected from it. It was in my mind. It's all in very slow motion. And I hit the ground, and I got out in the middle of the rice paddy, and I can see one of the airplanes turning around and coming back towards me, and I'm fumbling around with this radio, which, you're right, was not complicated. Only had two little switches on it, but I couldn't get the switches in the right position until about the time he boomed across the top, and I managed to mash down on the switches, and the thing sparked to life. I tell people that allowed me to say, in my very finest airline pilot drawl, I started babbling in that radio. Oh my goodness. And I remember thinking to myself, this does not sound good. But there was nothing I could do. I just babbled and babbled. The best thing that happened was I ran. And by the way, I had been trained that if you don't sound good on the radios, it would be better for you to die than to not sound good on the radios.
Right.
This is serious, very serious pilot stuff that's going on here. And I'm till finally I ran myself out of breath, which was the best thing that happened. And when I paused the inhale, I let off one of those buttons on the radio, and that allowed Dean, who flew over, to get a word in edgewise. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, we cannot come and get you. At which point I couldn't think of anything to say, and Dean said, "I'll see you when this is over," and he flew away.
Wow.
And I stood out there in the middle of that rice paddy. It was like I was the only person in the universe. I was just out there by myself. And then I wasn't alone for very long, of course, because about 1 million Vietnamese came across that rice paddy and captured me. And it all happened so fast it'd make your head swim. They tied me up with miles of rope, and that started what would turn out to be 5.5 years in prison over there.
So, so Dave, I don't know. I'm really sure this isn't going to be in your book, but in one conversation we had, that it's kind of stuck with me. You mentioned, because it's amazing to me, we're talking about probably the worst thing anyone could ever imagine happening to them, and like we're laughing, but you had mentioned that the Navy, I don't know if it's Navy or what level it is, they did a study on POWs, and then they have control groups. They do these kind of health and psychological studies, and one thing you told me, which I mean, it blows my mind, is that the POW group is outperforming the control group. Is that, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
I can. Sure. So we came home in 1973. In 1974, the Navy invited us to come to Pensacola over the course of a year and have a physical, and part of that was spend time with the shrinks, and so I have been to Pensacola every year since 1974, and after a few years they went to BUPERS, which Bureau of Navy Personnel back then, and found a socioeconomic double for each one of us. And they invited those guys to come be part of the control group. And so they have literally been running this parallel study of the ex-POWs and the control group since 75, I would guess. And one of the results, so we go down there. I go every year, and tell the docs, we say, what are you learning? Tell us what you're learning here. And one year, the doc that was in charge of it said, well, the way he said it was, he said the shrinks are having a field day with a control group. I said, they're what? And he said, oh my goodness. And I think they would tell you that the largest percentage of ex-POWs did not just survive that experience, they thrived on it. Now, we have had guys with problems, okay? We've had a suicide or two, but the largest percentage by far thrived on that experience. And you can think of it a couple of ways. One is, if you remember when your mama was bouncing you on her knee and she said, what doesn't kill you is going to make you stronger.
Yes.
She was right.
Yes.
The other was, my experience is all in Hanoi, all with aviators. They didn't bring the grunts up there with us. until the very, very end. And then they brought up a couple hundred grunts from someplace down towards the south, and they were released with us. But all of my experiences with air crew, and if you ask the folks at Pensacola why they think that was, they have a list of things that they will tell you. And I'll tell you what that is in a second here. The interesting thing to me in that is that I think this list I'm going to tell you is trainable. In other words, I don't think it's necessarily inherent in any of us. Now, some of us have a much bigger tendency in many areas. As you know, some people are extroverts, some people are introverts, some people are data minded, some people, and on and on. But the list of things that they told, and I know this because they told it to the Army got interested in how come these people thrived. What's going on here? The Army wanted to train, Tim, this may be something you've been exposed to. The Army wanted to train to do resiliency training. That's the buzzword in the last 15, 20 years or something. They wanted to do resiliency training. And so one of the places they went was to Pensacola, and they asked the docs, what can you tell us about these people? And what made them, you're telling us they thrived and that the control group has more issues than the XPOW group. Why? What's the deal here? And the doc said, yeah, sure, we can tell you. They said, here's the list. First of all, this is not in any particular order, by the way. These guys were problem solvers, or they see themselves as problem solvers. They are gregarious. Well, not gregarious. They are not loners, was the way they put it. They are gregarious. They have almost to a man a very strong faith some way. They are realistic optimists. It's not pie in the sky, crazy stuff. They see situations, but their tendency is always to look at the brighter side of it, the positive side of it. And it seems like there was one other, I'd have to dig out a file here but so now those things I do think are trainable. As a matter of fact, I think the military works on some of those things accidentally. The Army began working on them intentionally. I mean, I can train you, I think with some time, I could train you to look at things that come your way as a problem that you can solve somehow or make better or do something about.
Right. Like a puzzle, right?
Yeah, like a puzzle.
Right.
That's exactly right. I can, you could be trained. If you tend to be a pessimist, we could have a lot of discussions, and you actually could change that in your head. The idea of not being a loner, I've worked for years with people who are introverts and extroverts, and watched people make changes in their lives when they kind of realize certain things about the way they are and the way, we can control a lot of that. Not perfectly, but we can certainly influence the way we think about things, the way we look at situations, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a long version, but that's the way that whole experience impacted practically all the guys. I mean, it's way above 80%. When they say they thrived, they didn't just survive, they thrived. They're talking way over 80%.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's...
well, that really...
by the way,
I'm sorry. No.
No, I was going to say, which was, by the way, very comforting to hear.
Okay.
No
Well,
doubt.
well, I think one thing Tim and I we talk a lot about, because we see very much a core part of our mission is kind of the integration of transitioning veterans into their civilian life, and that there is this training that they have, and that's probably part of it is recently a lot of veterans will, obviously because of the past 20 years, they will have participated in been abroad and been in some very at the austere conditions, and the
Mhm.
thing that really I find and Tim talks about this, I find most impressive is when they're put in a difficult circumstance. It's their the calmness with which they handle challenges, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Opposed to, oh my gosh, I can't believe this just happened. They're
Mhm.
almost like, well, of course that happened, and here's what
Yeah.
I'm going to do about it, right?
And here's what I'm doing. That's
It's
right.
so there is a little bit of gallows humor involved, I think,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
there's humor with it, right? And then this
Yeah,
optimistic side that they're going to come out of it, and
sure.
there's really I think you find that on balance far more uh like you said, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, so the
Hmm.
POW group, you went through the worst circumstances, and you were
Hmm.
better than the control group, right? And I
Hmm.
think
Hmm.
if you were to do the same study with people out of the military versus their
Hmm.
civilian counterparts like me, I mean,
Hmm.
I think you'd see something similar. I think you'd see a group that's ready and trained for adversity.
Hmm.
um,
Well, something that's interesting, just getting into this conversation, and specifically, I'm drawing back to my own experience. One of the things that I pulled out of the military that I think has helped me along is that you learn in a real sense that nothing is permanent. Your
Hmm.
life from day one of taking the oath and being assigned your uniforms and everything else, it's temporary. Your whole life is based on your next activity. It's very methodical in the sense that it's mission oriented, right? If getting from point A
Hmm.
to point B, and then once you get to point B, you got to be ready for point C. The next thing
Hmm.
comes, and I think
Hmm.
there's a sense of, and again, I'm not a psychologist, and
Hmm.
I probably would be one of those guys that the psychiatrists were talking about having fun with, but it's one of those things that you realize that there is an end to whatever it is you're doing and a beginning to something else afterwards, unless you're closing your eyes for the last time, right? It's and
Hmm.
that there's a comfort in that, and I don't know that you would necessarily. I mean, I could see how your experience as a POW and feeling every day could be the last day. You don't really know, but in the general population of the military, change is just a normal part of life.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I believe that's what makes folks with previous military experience a valuable commodity in the marketplace.
right.
They're used to change. They're used to uh, being able to adapt to change. They're used to having to get going, whether they feel like getting going or not. So I see all those things as incredibly valuable traits for um, folks with businesses to they're looking for. I mean, they can train you to do whatever their business is.
Mhm.
That's not a big deal. It's these other kind of inherent or built-in characteristics that generally come with almost all the folks who've spent some time in the military. Um, initiative and resourcefulness and accepting responsibility and all of those kinds of things that you just can't. They're rare commodities, I believe, in our workforce, and I certainly sort of think that nowadays. Um, uh, at least it looks that way to me. So yeah, I think what the business you guys are in, which is helping transition folks out of the military and into the marketplace, is ought to be a very rewarding kind of business, I think.
It absolutely is, and I'll add to that that sentiment. The other thing that I love about putting military people to work in the civilian life is there's this concept we have, especially in the military artillery, fire for effect, and what that means is just do something, right? Just if it's not perfect, and you know, Drew is great at holding me accountable to things, even when I feel a little bit uncomfortable, and a little voice in my head says fire for effect. Let's see what's going to happen. You know, don't
Yeah.
make any stupid mistakes. You know, and
Yeah.
and I can't say that never happens, but at the end of the day, action is better than no action, and that seems to be a common thread with a lot of the folks that we work with that come out of the military and place them into civilian
Yeah.
roles.
Yeah.
Very rewarding to
Yeah.
echo your
Yeah.
point. Dave, you spent time in the Navy's leadership and management program. Can you tell us a little bit about that and kind of maybe how that's helped or provided some sort of I don't know direction with respect to whenever you transition from being in the military to a civilian?
Mhm. Sure. My last tour of duty in the Navy, I was sent to a naval amphibious school in Coronado, California. I was sent there to run a leadership and management training program for prospective commanding officers and executive officers. And the whole thing was a revelation to me. I mean, I never knew people studied people. It never dawned on me that, I mean, concepts like the difference between direct and indirect counseling, you know, the idea that if you're having trouble, uh, let's do it personally. If you're having trouble at home with your spouse, and I can get the conversation going, and I can eventually ask you what you might think you could do about that. And if you come to the idea that maybe I should go to a counselor, there's a high probability that you would do that. Whereas if I tell you right off the bat, you need to get to a counselor, there's a high probability that ain't going to happen.
Right,
You
right.
know, I mean, all of this was really a revelation to me, and the study of leadership, or how uh, different leaders approach different situations. All of that stuff was just like, wow, people actually do this kind of, so much so I did that for 2 years. By the way, I ran that course. Now that course was a competency-based course. The Navy had contracted with McBurr, a consulting company in Boston, and they defined a competency as something that more successful people do more of the time. And so they had an interview process to try to dig that stuff out, and we taught it along those lines. But it was so intriguing to me that when I left them, when I retired in '86, I decided to, well, I was going to go in business with a fellow that I had met who was a consultant. Uh, and then we had lunch one day, and I found out what go in business with him meant. And I went home and told my wife, I'm not going into business with Rick. That's all there is to it. He said, well, what do you mean? We got 2 little kids. You're going to be out of the Navy in a month. What are you going to do? I said, I don't know, but I'm not going into business with Rick. Maybe I'll start my own business. And so that decision kind of got forced upon me, and I decided to go into a consulting, training, uh, people kind of business on my own. And then I also decided to do I was encouraged to do some professional speaking. So between the consulting and training and speaking, that's what I've been doing ever since '86. And I work on people stuff and how people work together and all of that kind of thing. Um, but it all came out of that 2-year experience that I had in that leadership course, discovering that people really were interested in all this kind of stuff and studied
Right.
it and had ideas about it.
Right.
Some of the ideas weren't so good, but a lot of them were good. And,
Right.
so that's what got me started down that track, and really I'm still on it, quite frankly.
Mhm.
Um, and along the way, I've met some very wonderful people who were very helpful to me. But I was thinking about the comment you made about leaving. We were talking about folks coming out of the military. I'll tell you a real quick story about coming out of the military. So I've been in the Navy since I was 18 years old, and now I'm going to leave the Navy. I cannot begin to tell you the turmoil that was going on inside of me about that whole thing. I mean, I'm going to step out into an unknown world. I had never, for all those years, I'd never thought about money. I mean, the Navy just stuck it in my bank account. It wasn't a lot, but I didn't need a lot, and I had a wife and two kids and a mortgage and a car payment. And I mean, I was in absolute turmoil. As a matter of fact, so much so that my wife and I decided we're going to go away for a weekend, leave the children with grandma and grandpa, and we're going to decide what you're going to do when you grow up. And so, so we did exactly that. We went away for a weekend. The problem was I was so agitated I couldn't talk about it. And finally, about Sunday at noon, my wife gave up on having the conversation, and we enjoyed a couple of hours before we went back and got the kids again. I just couldn't talk about it.
Mm.
I had a good friend who was a Navy captain, ex-POW, who had retired. And so I called Bill and said, Bill, we got to go to lunch. I have to talk to you. I need somebody to talk to. And we went to lunch. I can remember him telling me, Dave, I know you're all twisted in knots about this. Let me tell you what, 2 years from now, you'll wonder why that was such a big deal, why you were so messed up over that whole idea. He said, everything you know and you've done for 26 years, you just need different words to describe it.
Right.
And different vocabulary, and you'll be learning the vocabulary, and you're going to do just fine. No matter what you do, you'll be fine. I'm promising. He promised me that. And I thought, Bill, I'm come back and kill you if you're wrong. But I'm gonna take your word. And he was right. He was right. When I look back on that whole experience, I mean, even within a year or year and a half, I'm looking back thinking, why was I so upset? I've learned the language out here. It's just a different world, but it's the same kind of world,
It is. No, it's so interesting because that is actually, I would say, if I have what I feel is a mission, it is being a translator, but for people on both sides of the fence. And you're right, because when I first started, we talked about this in our first podcast. When I first started doing work with the military, I'd go up to Fort Hood, and I would have no idea what they just said. And then over time, I'd get acclimated with it. And I tried to come back to, my little branch office and tell them. And it was like, it was two completely different worlds. But you're right, the basic functions, I mean, they're all getting done. It's just what you call them.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Right?
That's
exactly
right.
So, no, I think that's a core part of our mission is like, dude, we don't have to train anybody. All the training's done. We just have to give them confidence that they know what they're doing and help provide them the language to have successful conversations with people in the civilian sector. So,
Dave,
well, I think.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm agreeing with that completely. I think that's the task at hand probably for Tango Alpha 3 is to figure out how to be the translator for both on both sides because they speak different languages.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, this is a great topic and one of my favorites because frankly, at least most recently, and it's kind of had me reflect back to whenever I transitioned out of the military. I come across quite a few veterans that lack in confidence. Again, they don't lack in confidence from their skill set. They lack in confidence for the transition and how they can catch up and compete with folks that weren't in the military that might have gone on and gotten their degrees and done whatever they've done and started to become embedded in their careers. And I tell them, and this seems to resonate, you know, while civilians tend to go to school and you're learning your craft, they're not getting thrust into an organizational operation anything near what the military does on a daily basis. I wrote a blog a couple of weeks ago about all of the different aspects, all of the different functions that a military, a superpowers military has to achieve in order to carry out the operation of war. And war is not a good thing. Nobody wants war, but there's so many components to that. Whether it's providing housing, providing medical care, providing logistical support, moving people all over the world at a moment's notice. It's really quite enormous. And even though we as individual members of a military force, we have our own jobs that we're responsible for. To be able to operate in operations like that, and to be able to see yourself, your own individual contribution as part of a big picture, that's a big thing, and that's extremely valuable to companies that are looking for people that can pick up the ball and run with it. And I tell that to a lot of veterans that have confidence, that need help with their confidence, and it helps. But nothing helps more than whenever you get out and you go through that realization that you eventually got to in a couple of months, right? Where you look back and you realize, man, it's one of those situations where the fear is worse than the reality. So that's personally, that's one of the favorite aspects of my job, is sitting down with veterans looking for work and saying, look, this is you. This is you're an amazing value to a lot of companies that are looking for not only your technical skill set. We can train in your technical skill set. It might take us 4, 5, 6, or however many years you were in the military to be trained to operate with a military mind.
That's right. It is. They have, typically ex-military have a lot of traits that they've acquired, or skills that they've acquired, that are very, very, very valuable, more valuable than the technical training that a company needs to do whatever their job is. Right. No, absolutely. I agree.
And I got to make a note to all the civilian listeners out there. No offense. No offense to your skill set. You're great at what you do, but I'm pulling for the home team, which are the veterans of the world and the folks that have raised their hand and supported our freedom. And for whatever it's worth, I owe it to them to do what I can to promote their efforts.
Yeah.
So. Last closing thoughts, Dave. We could have, like I said, we could have several conversations, and I hope we have more in the future, because there's a lot of there's a lot of things that I know that you've been through and experiences that you've had that are very valuable to not only Drew and I, but anybody that decides to listen to our salute report. But any parting words, any advice for vets looking to get out?
Well, I think we've been talking about it here in those last few minutes. It is really understanding that what you bring value to any organization by virtue of the experiences that you've had, and it really is a matter of learning their language. You need to learn that troop movement means logistical support, or that supply chain management means get the doggone bullets to the shooters, things like that. It is learning that language, and my experience is, my money would be bet on the vast majority of them going out there and thriving.
Amen.
I just feel very strongly about it. You know, I think about all the sailors I've had work for me over the years and that I've worked with over the years. I'd have taken them in any organization in a heartbeat,
Mm-hmm.
because I can always teach them what needs to be done in the way of the job. I just can't teach them to have initiative and seek responsibility and be able to deal with all the change and those kinds of things.
Gotcha. So you talk about some of the organizations that you worked with and the companies that you consult. Is there a way? I mean, are you still actively doing that? And is there a way that people can reach out and get in contact with you?
Yes, I am. I have a website.
Okay.
It's just under my name, davecarey.com. Um, I, I really have been blessed to work with a lot of organizations, and I'm not actively chasing work anymore, but I'm still working. So as things come along, if it's interesting to me or enticing to me, I do it. And so I guess you would say I'm semi-retired or something like that.
Gotcha.
I don't think I'll ever retire. That's not a good word, I don't think, to have in our vocabulary.
Right.
So anyway, on my website, there's a whole section of lists of companies and organizations I've worked with or spoken at. Yeah. So I'm game. You know, anybody wants to give me a call, talk's cheap, and I got a lot of it.
What about pickleball challengers?
Yeah, I'll take them on too.
Drew, any closing thoughts?
No, I really don't, Dave. I thank you so much for appearing on this episode with us. Always enlightening, and we can't wait to have you back.
Well, I'd look forward to it. I really like what you guys are doing. I wish you the very best, and I'd be happy to contribute in any way I can, except with my checkbook, of course.
That's what everybody says. What gives? No, we appreciate it, and as I said, it's anytime I talk to you, it's such an honor, and to put into perspective what the experiences you have are just it's difficult, and bless you, and I thank you for it and your service. So with that, I will let you go until next time. You like how I put that in there?
I did.
But I do want to say one more thing about veteran suicide. Each day, 22 members commit suicide, and we got to stop that. Mission 22 is a good place to get educated and to get support for veterans that are looking that need support. We got to stop it, and that's a good place to start. So. Mission 22. Check them out. Thanks so much, and look forward to our next discussion.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you, Tim.
I'll look forward to it. Sure enough.
All right.